1973, October 2nd, the New York Film Festival at Lincoln Center. The lights go down. On screen, a man wakes up in a small apartment. He stares at himself in the mirror. And a voice, low and worn, whispers the line that would define an entire era of American cinema. You don't make up for your sins in church. You do it in the streets. You do it at home. The rest is bullshit, and you know it. Almost 2 hours later, the audience walked out into the Manhattan night stunned. Some were laughing. Some were arguing. Some couldn't speak at all, because none of them had ever seen anything like it. This wasn't a movie about the Mafia. It was the block. It was the bar. It was the kid you grew up with who owed the wrong guy money and disappeared one Sunday, and nobody talked about it again. The film was called Mean Streets. The director was a skinny, asthmatic kid from Elizabeth Street named Martin Scorsese. He was 30 years old. He'd made 2 features before this, neither a hit, and Hollywood had all but written him off. But that fall, everything changed. Because Scorsese had done something few others in American cinema had dared. He'd stopped inventing gangsters. He'd started remembering them. This is the true story behind Mean Streets, the real Little Italy that shaped Martin Scorsese. The bars, the priests, the small-time hoods, the loan sharks, the uncles who never explained what they did for a living, the whispered fear in the tenements, the Catholic guilt that never washed off. This is the story of how one director took the neighborhood that raised him and turned it into the blueprint for every mob film that came after. Goodfellas, Casino, The Irishman, all of it. It starts here, on a block between Prince and Houston, with a boy watching everything from a fire escape. Here's the thing you have to understand about Scorsese's Little Italy. It wasn't a neighborhood. It was a village, a closed system. Sicilians on Elizabeth Street, Neapolitans on Mulberry, Calabrese on Mott. Each block had its own rules, its own dialect, its own quiet violence, and much of the Lower East Side sat under the shadow of the Genovese family, which had deep roots in the docks, the loan sharking, the gambling. If you grew up there in the 1950s, you knew everybody. You knew who worked and who didn't. You knew who owed money and who collected it. You knew which social club you didn't walk into. And you learned, very early, that the wrong word at the wrong table could end you. Martin Charles Scorsese was born November 17th, 1942, in Queens. But when he was still a boy, around 8 years old, his family moved to 253 Elizabeth Street, a cold-water tenement in the heart of Little Italy. His father, Charles, was a clothes presser in the garment district. His mother, Catherine, worked in the same trade and cooked Sunday sauce that filled the stairwell. And Martin, the youngest boy, was the one who couldn't run. He had asthma so severe that while the other kids fought and played stickball in the street below, he'd sit inside gasping. So he watched. From that fire escape, from that window, he watched everything. He watched the wise guys on the corner in their pressed shirts and pinky rings. He watched them shake hands with the priest walking to Old St. Patrick's on Mulberry. He watched them collect from the produce guy and the barber and the man who ran numbers out of the candy store. And he noticed something. Nobody in the neighborhood called them criminals. They were just the guys. The neighborhood guys. They took care of things. They were feared and respected and loved and hated all at once, sometimes by the same family, at the same dinner table. And then there was his uncle. One of them. Because Scorsese had uncles whose names carried weight on those blocks. There was one in particular, his paternal uncle, nicknamed Joe the Bug, who Scorsese has cited as part of the raw material for Johnny Boy, a wild man, reckless. The kind of guy who'd walk into a bar owing money to half the room and start a fight with the other half. Scorsese also drew on childhood friends from the block who were exactly that reckless. Every family in the neighborhood had one. The cousin nobody could control. The friend who was going to get himself killed. The kid who thought the rules were a suggestion. That was the world. Now here's where it starts to bend toward the movie. Scorsese served as an altar boy at St. Patrick's Old Cathedral on Mulberry Street. He wore the white robe. He held the candles. He wanted to be a priest. Actually wanted it. He entered a preparatory seminary as a teenager. He lasted about a year and was asked to leave. But the church never left him. And that's the tension. That's the whole engine of Mean Streets. A boy who wants to be holy in a world where holiness is impossible. A boy whose best friend is the neighborhood's biggest problem. A boy who thinks if he just protects the reckless one, if he just carries the weight, maybe God will notice. Maybe the sin gets paid off. Scorsese went to NYU Film School in the early 60s. He made shorts. He got noticed. He directed a small feature called Who's That Knocking at My Door in 1967, shot partly in the same Little Italy he'd grown up in. It didn't do much. Then in 1972, the exploitation king Roger Corman gave him a job directing a low-budget Depression-era picture called Boxcar Bertha. Cheap, fast, bloody. Scorsese made it in about 24 days, and when he finished, he showed a cut to a friend named John Cassavetes. Cassavetes watched it. Then he turned to Scorsese and said, in words Scorsese has quoted many times, "You've just spent a year of your life making a piece of garbage. Don't do it again. Make something you know. Make something personal. Make something only you can make." Scorsese went back to a screenplay he'd been kicking around for years with his old NYU friend Mardick Martin, much of it written driving around Little Italy at night, pointing at bars and doorways and saying, "That happened there. That's where my cousin got his teeth knocked out." Its working title was Season of the Witch. It didn't have much of a plot, but it had the neighborhood on every page. He renamed it Mean Streets, after a line from Raymond Chandler. Down these mean streets a man must go who is not himself mean, and he went looking for money. Nobody wanted it. Corman offered to finance it only if Scorsese made every character black and set it in Harlem, a blaxploitation gambit. Scorsese refused. Every studio passed. Finally, a producer named Jonathan Taplin, who'd been the road manager for the band, helped raise the money, a shoestring budget of just a few $100,000, on the condition of a distribution promise. Warner Brothers eventually picked up distribution. Scorsese had his shot. He cast Harvey Keitel as Charlie. Keitel had worked with him before. Brooklyn Kid, ex-Marine, serious, contained, perfect for a young man trying to be respectable in a world that punishes respectability. For Johnny Boy, the wild one, the walking disaster, there was a young actor named Robert De Niro. He was 29. He and Scorsese had crossed paths as kids in the neighborhood, and De Niro was offered his pick of parts. When he settled on Johnny Boy, something ignited, because he understood that character. He'd seen that character on every corner from Kenmare to Houston. The shoot lasted just 27 days, almost all of it in Los Angeles, doubling for New York, because the budget couldn't afford Manhattan. Only about 7 days of location work happened in the actual city, including nights on Mulberry Street, at the San Gennaro feast, at the church, shots grabbed on the fly, often without permits. Real neighborhood behind them. The film was made for almost nothing. It looks like it cost everything. Here's what makes Mean Streets different from every gangster film before it. The Godfather had come out in 1972, just 1 year earlier. Coppola's film was operatic. It was about kings, the Corleones as royalty, as tragic aristocrats, beautiful, mythic, distant. Mean Streets was the opposite in every conceivable way. There are no bosses. There are no dons. There is a small bar with red walls, a pool hall, a fist fight over $16, a guy named Johnny Boy who owes $3,000 to a loan shark named Michael and will not pay. There is Charlie, working for his uncle Giovanni, a mid-level neighborhood guy who wants to give Charlie a restaurant if Charlie just plays it right, just doesn't get involved with the wrong people, just doesn't fall in love with the wrong girl, just doesn't try to save Johnny Boy from himself. That was the whole Mafia most people never saw. The bottom. The kids at the bottom. The ones who never got made. The ones who ran errands, hustled small scams, took the beatings, borrowed money they couldn't pay back, and died in alleys with no ceremony, no funeral procession, no story to tell. In real Little Italy, for every Carlo Gambino sitting in a mansion in Massapequa, there were 100 Johnny Boys. Guys with no future. Guys who annoyed the wrong people and got put in the trunk of a car on a Tuesday. Nobody wrote them into history. Scorsese did. Watch what he did with Johnny Boy. The first time we really see him, Robert De Niro is walking into the bar in slow motion to the Rolling Stones singing Jumpin' Jack Flash, a woman on each arm, hat cocked. Grin like a lit match. It's one of the coolest entrances in cinema. And within 30 minutes of screen time, that same character has climbed to a tenement roof and fired a pistol into the sky just to feel something. He's insulted a loan shark to his face. He's laughed while owing money he cannot pay to a man who has already decided to kill him. Johnny Boy is not a hero. He is not even a competent criminal. He is a walking suicide note. And De Niro understood that from the inside, because he'd known those guys. Now here's what the movie is really about. Because Mean Streets is not a heist picture. It's not a rise and fall. There is no big score. The plot, if you can even call it that, is a moral trap. Charlie loves his uncle. Charlie loves the neighborhood and wants what it offers. A restaurant, respect, a place at the table. But Charlie also has Johnny Boy. And Johnny Boy is the wound Charlie will not stop touching. Charlie tells himself he protects Johnny Boy out of loyalty, out of Christian obligation. He literally holds his hand over a candle flame in a church and tests how long he can stand the pain. He thinks that's penance. He thinks if he suffers enough for Johnny Boy, God will forgive whatever he does for his uncle. It never works like that. The neighborhood doesn't reward you for saving the reckless ones. It cuts you loose along with them. And that was Scorsese's real subject. Not the crimes, the theology. What does it mean to be a Catholic in a world where every meal you eat is paid for by other people's suffering? What does it mean to love your friend when your friend is going to get you both killed? What does it mean to want respect from an organization that will destroy you the moment you become inconvenient? Coppola made mob life grand. Scorsese made it sweaty. Coppola gave you a boss behind a desk. Scorsese gave you a kid holding his hand over a flame, asking God for a break he was never going to get. The look of the film changed everything, too. That red light in the bar, the way Scorsese lit Charlie's face like he was standing at the mouth of hell, that wasn't just style, that was memory. Scorsese grew up in bars like that. And the camera doesn't just observe, it moves. It stumbles. It gets drunk with the characters. In one famous shot, Scorsese mounted the camera on Harvey Keitel's body so that, as Charlie staggers through the bar loaded to the sound of the Chips singing Rubber Biscuit, Charlie stays fixed, and the whole world tilts around him. That was the invention of a visual language every filmmaker who came up after would study. The needle drops were another revolution. Scorsese used pop music not as background, but as consciousness. Be My Baby by the Ronettes opens the film. Jumpin' Jack Flash announces Johnny Boy. Please, Mr. Postman, Rubber Biscuit, Mickey's Monkey thread through the bar and the street. Every cue was a memory Scorsese had of that block. His mother's records, the jukebox at the corner. When you watch Goodfellas 17 years later and hear Layla score a montage of dead bodies, you're watching Scorsese refine the technique he pioneered here. And then there's the ending. This is where the movie stops being a director's memories and becomes the real, blood-soaked math of that world. Charlie and Johnny Boy and Teresa, the girl Charlie loves in secret, are in a car trying to leave the neighborhood for a few hours to cool down. Because Johnny Boy has finally, publicly, humiliated Michael the loan shark. As the car rolls down a side street, another car pulls up alongside. Inside is the gunman, played in a quiet cameo by Martin Scorsese himself. He fires. Johnny Boy takes a bullet in the neck. Charlie, hit in the hand, crashes the car into a fire hydrant, staggers out, and falls to his knees in the spurting water, dazed, bleeding, no closer to redemption than he was on page 1. Paramedics take Charlie and Teresa away. Johnny Boy's fate is left hanging. Cut to black. That ending, according to Scorsese, was pulled from real life. A shooting he'd heard about growing up. A guy in the neighborhood who annoyed the wrong crew and got hit in a car late one night. No trial. No investigation that led anywhere. Just gone. Just another name whispered on the corner for a couple weeks and then forgotten. That was the truth of low-level Little Italy. You didn't die for something big. You died for $3,000 and a bad attitude. When Mean Streets opened commercially, it made only modest money. But every important critic in America knew what they were watching. Pauline Kael in The New Yorker called it a true original of its period, a triumph of personal filmmaking. Vincent Canby in The New York Times praised it as fresh and beautifully realized. And inside Hollywood, a door swung open. Every young director who saw it understood you could make a movie about your own block. You could put your uncle in it. You could use the music you actually grew up on. You could shoot in real bars, with real light and real people. You could tell a story with no clean moral, no tidy plot, no redemption. And it would be art. It would be American. Robert De Niro became Robert De Niro because of Mean Streets. 1 year later, Francis Ford Coppola cast him as the young Vito Corleone in The Godfather Part II, and he won the Academy Award. He and Scorsese became the defining actor-director partnership of American cinema. Taxi Driver, New York, New York, Raging Bull, The King of Comedy, Goodfellas, Casino, The Irishman. All of it started in that low-budget shoot. Little Italy itself was already dying when Scorsese put it on film. By the 70s, the Italian population was leaving. By the 80s, Chinatown had absorbed most of the old blocks. The social clubs closed one by one. The neighborhood guys aged out or went to prison on federal RICO cases. Scorsese himself would later call Mean Streets, in part, an act of preservation, a love letter to a world he could already feel disappearing under his feet. And here's what nobody fully understood at the time. Mean Streets is the DNA. Every Scorsese mob film after it is an elaboration of the same theme. Goodfellas takes the Johnny Boy energy and expands it across 30 years. Casino takes the Charlie moral dilemma and moves it to the Nevada desert. The Irishman takes the whole Catholic guilt engine and stretches it into a 3.5-hour meditation on old age and damnation. But the seed is here. A boy on a fire escape, a friend who cannot be saved, a church that offers no forgiveness, a bar with red light, a neighborhood that eats its own. So what does it all mean? 50 years on, Mean Streets is remembered as the moment American cinema learned that the deepest crimes are the small ones, that the biggest mafia story isn't the boss. It's the kid who owed $3,000 and thought he could talk his way out, that the real streets aren't ruled by dons in mansions. They're ruled by whispers on the corner, by the loan shark who smiles when he collects, by the friend you can't stop protecting even though he's dragging you down, and by the priest who won't absolve you no matter how many times you kneel. Scorsese never really got out of Little Italy. He moved uptown. He won the Oscar. He became one of the most celebrated filmmakers in the history of the medium. But every mob movie he ever made after 1973 is an argument with the neighborhood he grew up in. Every Charlie is a version of the kid on the fire escape. Every Johnny Boy is the wild one he couldn't save. Every red bar is a room he sat in as a boy, watching men who scared him and men who loved him talk about money and death and the weather in the same breath. That's the true story behind Mean Streets. Not a plot, a memory, not a script, a neighborhood. A boy with asthma who couldn't run with the other kids, so he watched everything from a window. And decades later, when he had a camera, he pointed it at the same block, told the truth about it, and American cinema was never the same. If you found this story fascinating, hit subscribe. We drop a new mob documentary every week. Drop a comment. What Scorsese film should we deep dive next?